our hearts be good soil, so that in us might grow your virtues of love, compassion, grace and mercy, forgiveness and trust. I pray that my words would be faithful to you, and that all our hearts would be open this morning to growth and new beginnings. In your name we pray. Amen. How many of you have ever heard of Rabbi Edwin Friedman? He was a rabbi, as I said, and a family therapist. He lived in the Washington, D.C. area for about 25 years and was ordained at the Bethesda Jewish congregation. And he's one of the greatest teachers of an approach to psychotherapy called family systems theory. Family systems theory teaches that inside of each one of us are multiple different parts and roles, kind of like a family, related to each other, and that they're all a part of ourselves. And when we come to understand these different parts of ourselves and we integrate them and we heal the trauma that we've experienced in our lives, this integrated self helps us to be in relationship with other people. Towards the end of his life, Friedman wrote a series of fables based on what he had learned and taught about family systems theory and about what he knew to be true about the complexity of human relationships. In one of these stories, called The Bridge, there's a man who is on a journey. The man is clear about his purpose. He knows where he's headed, and he is going there to fulfill his goal. But along the way, he comes upon a bridge. There's another person coming across the bridge, and as that person comes closer and closer to the man, he sees that this person has a rope that's tied around their waist. And as this person comes closer, they start to uncurl this rope and then says to the man, "Pardon me, would you be so kind as to hold the end of this for a moment?" The man is surprised, but because this person is so polite, he does what he's asked. "Thank you," says the other. And then he jumps over the edge of the bridge. "Two hands now," he says. "Remember, hold tight." As he hurls down over the edge of the bridge to the rope's length and stops abruptly when he reaches the end of the rope. Instinctively, this man who had been on a journey is now holding tight to the other end of this rope and to keep from being dragged over the side of the bridge. He manages to brace himself against the edge, and catching his breath, he looks down over into the oblivion. "Why did you do this?" he calls out. "Remember," says the man dangling from the end of the rope, "if you let go, I will be lost." "But I cannot pull you up," the man cries. "But I am your responsibility now." "How can I help you?" "I cannot pull you in, and there's no place to tie this rope so that I may go and find someone else to help. Just remember," says the man dangling over oblivion, "my life is in your hands." And now, this man is stuck. If he lets go, this person will be lost. He even considers jumping over the bridge himself, just to show him what a foolish choice this was. But because this person dangling off the end of the rope will not take responsibility for their own action, will not climb back up the rope and help him get out of this terrible situation, the man who was on a journey is now stuck there. This fable is a story to remind us to be careful of the ropes that other people try to hand us. Because otherwise we will end up taking more responsibility for other people's lives than we do for our own. This is a hard teaching, but it is a story about boundaries and about how much control we give to other people over our own lives. And it is a story about getting free. getting free from relationships with difficult people and relationships that bind us in unhealthy ways. As we wrap up this series on loving people that we don't like, I want to talk today about two practices that are incredibly important if we are to have healthy relationships in any sort of community. Not just with people that we don't like, but with everyone. With people that we love. With friends and family and coworkers and fellow church members, as well as people that we struggle to love. Setting boundaries and practicing forgiveness are two of the most important things that we can do in relationship because they help us to care for ourselves, to establish enough healthy space between ourselves and others that we do not become mired in disappointment, frustration, and resentment. Boundaries and forgiveness can be two of the hardest things to set and to maintain and to practice in relationship. But that is why we have to revisit them again and again and again. And it is why we need God's grace in our own lives, in our relationships, and in community. So first, let me say a few words about boundaries. Boundaries are simply the invisible line between where we stop and another person starts. Boundaries, if we are able to articulate them, can help us set the parameters and expectations and establish how we want to be treated in a relationship. For any long-term relationship, boundaries are critical to maintain, and they are especially important when it comes to relationships with difficult people. Now, we all know the phrase, good fences make good neighbors, right? And why is this? It's because a fence helps to mark a clear boundary in a community where one person's property ends and another person's property begins. In my neighborhood, a fence between myself and my neighbor will tell me which part of the grass I'm supposed to mow. Whose responsibility is it if a branch falls off a tree? It also creates a sense of privacy and security. This space belongs to me. And if you are coming into it, it's either because I invited you in or because you are trespassing a boundary. Now, boundaries are one of the few things that we can actually try to control in a relationship. And it's part of the reason why people get under our skin. Because we have not adequately communicated boundaries or held on to the healthy boundaries that we need. And I think part of what makes this hard is because as Christians, right, we feel like we are supposed to love people unconditionally. That we're supposed to put up with people and their difficult or even harmful behaviors, because that's what Jesus would do, isn't it? But that is a distortion of the way in which God loves us and the way in which Jesus taught us to love. God puts boundaries on relationship. From the very beginning, when God created human beings and placed them in the garden together, God created some boundaries, right? God gave some clear expectations for what this covenant relationship with one another and with creation and with God was supposed to look like. And again, God keeps trying to establish boundaries around God's chosen people. And then when Jesus comes on the scene and Jesus tries to show us how to love one another, Jesus too sets boundaries. He loves a lot of difficult people. And he also takes time away to pray. Jesus says no, even to his beloved family. And over again with his disciples, he shows them that what love looks like is about being clear about your purpose and about your own needs as well as the needs of the other. And when Jesus is asked, which one of the religious laws is the most important of all, this is what he says. Love the Lord your God with all of your heart and your soul and your strength and your mind, and love your neighbor as you love yourself. Which means that we cannot love our neighbor and we cannot love God if we do not love ourselves. And we need to love ourselves by communicating our own needs and limitations and boundaries in relationships. Boundaries are also important when it comes to forgiveness. Now, forgiveness is a deep and a complex topic, especially when we think about these big acts of forgiveness that leave us inspired and in awe, right? Like victims of crimes who have forgiven their perpetrators. But forgiveness can be just as powerful when we practice it daily, with the people in our lives with whom we interact on a daily basis, people that we love as well as people that we struggle to love. This kind of exercise, this practice of daily forgiveness, is what helps to prepare us for harder things. It helps us work towards forgiving those people who have really hurt us deeply, and to learn how to love those people that we dislike. In our gospel reading this morning, Jesus is talking to his disciples about the importance of practicing forgiveness in community, about how it really is about a relationship with one another and with God when we seek forgiveness from another person. But right in the middle of this important teaching, Peter interrupts. Of course it's Peter, right? Jesus, wait. I have a question. How many times are we supposed to forgive a person? 7? Is 7 enough times? It's kind of ironic, I think, that it's Peter, of course, asking Jesus how many times he needs to forgive, given how many times Jesus forgives Peter. But his question is honest. Forgiveness is hard. He wants to know, how many times do I have to do this? How much is enough really enough? And Peter thinks that he's stretching, right? He's really being a good person, a faithful person, a man of God by saying, I'm going to forgive somebody not once, twice, 3 times, 7 times. And Jesus comes back and says, no, 7 times 7. Or in some translation, 77 times 7. So is it 7 or 77 or 490? Okay, wait, just give me the rule, Jesus. So you're saying now that if I forgive somebody 490 times, then on the 491st time, I'm done. I never have to do this again, right? And we think of that as a boundary. We think that forgiveness has to have limits, that we need to know how often or to what extent or how many times we should forgive. Because we think forgiveness is about that other person and what they have done. But forgiveness is about getting free, you guys. It's about liberating ourselves and one another from bitterness, from resentment and pain. And when we think about forgiveness as liberation, then maybe we'll put that boundary in a different place. Not about on how many times we will forgive, but on how and why. One of the struggles we have with forgiveness, see, is accountability. What if this other person does it again? What if we forgive them and we're not standing up for ourselves or holding them accountable for what they did? And so we are identifying what they did wrong and we're calling it out, and that is a part of forgiveness, but that is not the whole. Forgiveness is not about letting another person off the hook. It's about letting you off the hook. Because when we refuse to forgive, the other person may not even know what they did wrong, or that they did something wrong at all. And you see, they're free. They're going on about their lives as if nothing has ever happened, but we are the ones who remain bound. Bound by our anger and our resentment and our frustration and the hurt that that other person has caused us. I want to tell you a story about a couple that went to therapy. And what brought them into the therapist's office initially was the wife's affair. But as they began to talk and unravel their relationship, years of grievances on both parts began to spill forth. The wife resented being the family breadwinner and the spokesperson for her family for 13 years as her introverted husband held back. The husband resented her resentment. We really had this pattern established. It's her fault, it's his fault, and the fingers were never pointed at ourselves, the wife said. After a few miserable months of trying to sort this out, they went to a therapist named Bridget Manley-Mayer, who practices a kind of counseling called discernment counseling. This is to help couples in therapies, married couples, committed couples, decide in 5 sessions or less whether or not to divorce. And the protocol for discernment offers couples 3 choices at the end of each session. Stay together and commit to 6 months of couples therapy, or begin the divorce and commit to 6 months of couples therapy, or begin the divorce process, or come back for another session, which would end in the same options. The wife thought she wanted a divorce, but she couldn't bear the havoc that it was going to wreak on their family. The husband wanted to stay together, but he didn't know how to fix what was broken. And so the therapist asked, would you be open to coming back and continuing to work on this? And to that, they both said yes. And so they talked about the affair and what had led up to it, his avoidance, her woundedness from her childhood, and they came back again and again. If we were going to work this out, the husband said, I had to forgive her. And he realized that he had forgiveness to earn as well. And to accept forgiveness, the wife knew she really had to forgive herself. This forgiveness never took the form of a speech or a heartfelt letter. It came gradually, in spurts, as the wife demonstrated her remorse and trustworthiness, and the husband became better at opening up. They worked in therapy for 1.5 years until they realized they didn't need the therapist anymore. They had pulled their marriage back from the brink, and 12 years later, it remains stronger and more honest than ever. You see, sometimes forgiveness is a process of 2 people working together towards the same goal in a relationship. But other times, forgiveness is something we have to do on our own. And maybe it's because we are not ready to have that hard conversation. Maybe it's because the other person hasn't yet recognized what they did wrong, or they refuse to apologize or take responsibility. Or maybe we have decided that we no longer want that relationship, but we can still engage in the process of forgiveness. So I recommend 3 steps. If this is something you want to practice in your daily life. And the first is to start small. It's like building up a muscle, and you have to start with the lightest weight. paying attention how it feels when you release a little bit of anger at a time. The second thing is to try and do or say something nice about the person you are trying to forgive. Maybe you buy them a cup of coffee, or you write them a note, or maybe you just talk to God and try to say something nice about this person. But any act of kindness towards them is going to help you heal. And the last is to try to remember God's forgiveness for you. To remember those days when you weren't always at your best, when your eraser was down to the top of the pencil, and yet you were offered grace and forgiveness. And see if in remembering the grace that God has had for you, that you can offer that to someone else. You see, setting boundaries and practicing forgiveness, they can help us in every relationship that we have. And they can also help us when we need to learn how to let go. So I want to tell you the end of this fable. The man on the bridge decides that he's finally going to accept the choice for his own life. He questions whether he's going to save his own life or the life of the man at the end of the rope. And so this is what he says. I want you to listen carefully because I mean what I am about to say. I will not accept the position of choice for your life, only for my own. I hereby give the choice back to you. And so he tells him, you can either climb up to the top of this rope, or I will let it go. He says, how can you possibly do this? How can you let go of the rope? And the man says, I accept your choice, and let's go. Now, if this were a real story, with someone literally dangling off of a bridge, the end of this would be horrifying. But it's just a fable. It is a story meant to help us reframe our way of being in relationship with other people. And so I want to invite you today to imagine letting go of that rope. Any rope at which the end of which is bitterness, or anger, or resentment, or feeling trapped. Let it go. Forgive. And be free.
Thank you, Reverend Rachel. At this time in our service,